In this video, we're going to show you how to put on new brake rotors, sprockets, a new chain, and how to install new tires onto a brand new wheel set. First thing is a huge thank you to our friends at Rims Plus. They supplied us with the hubs and rims, all pre-built. They really made the bike come together. Here we go. Remove and install front brake rotor. If the bolts give you a little bit of a tough time to remove, use some penetrating lube, spray it on there, let it soak in there for a few minutes, then the bolts should pop right out. Use thread lock when installing the new bolts. We're using a brand new braking rotor which performs and looks great. Install all the bolts by hand just to get the rotor in place, then go back and tighten in a crisscross pattern, and then as well as torque them according to the specs in your owner's manual. Remove and install rear brake rotor. It's going to be a very similar process as the front brake rotor, except for these bolts are actually 10mm heads as opposed to the Allens on the front wheel. Use thread lock when reinstalling the bolts. Again, we're installing a new braking rotor onto our rims, which, let's be honest, they look amazing. And go ahead and tighten everything up. Prepare the rims for the tires. Instead of the rubber band strips that come stock on pretty much all dirt bikes, we're going with duct tape where we split the roll in half and then make 2 complete revolutions around the rim and then just make sure that it's sticking down. This is plenty of tape to protect the tube from the spokes. Then locate your valve and rim lock holes and then go ahead and cut those out with a razor blade. And repeat the process on the front rim. Install the rim locks onto both rims. And by the way, you can win this 2007 YZ125. We're super excited to give it away. Head over to patreon.com/themxfactory. The link is in the description below. Install the rear tire. Not all tires have directional patterns on them, but this one does. You can go intermediate if you put it one way or soft if you go the other. We chose to install it in the intermediate tread pattern. Just double check to make sure if your tire does have directional cues. Use Simple Green to help the tire get on the rim. Make sure the rim lock is seated in one side of the tire before you begin. I set the new tire on top of the old tire. I even moved to the ground here. It's the way I've always changed tires on the ground. It's a personal preference. You can do it in a tire stand or however you'd like. Using 2 tire irons on the opposite side of the rim lock, just start to use your leverage and get one side of the tire on. Usually 2 nuts come onto a valve stem. Just go ahead and take one off. Just put a slight amount of air into your new tube before you install. It'll help avoid from pinching. And I always use baby powder before I install a tube. I respray some Simple Green on the side of the tire that's already been sprayed, but I just want to make sure that it's nice and lubed up. Then hit the other side. Now place the tube inside the rim and make sure the tube gets seated all the way down into the rim. Then you can get both your hands behind the valve stem and push it through the hole. Make sure to get that nut on there right away. Now using 2 tire irons, just a few inches on each side of the rim lock, I use a 3rd tire iron and start working one side of the tire on before I switch to the other side of the tire. It's important near the rim lock to make sure that the tire is seated down into the rim. You can do this with your hands, or I just like to use a little body weight when I'm doing the rear tire. Now just taking very small bites at a time. You'll eventually get there. The smaller the bites, the easier it should go on. If you're having any type of resistance, it's usually because the tire is not seated down into the rim, down by the rim lock, and then when you get to the end, just a little push and the tire goes on. Use air, probably about up to 30 to 40 psi to seat the tire onto the rim properly, and then set your final air pressure, usually around 13 pounds. Then tighten down your rim lock. Install the front tire. This is going to be a very similar process to installing the rear tire, using Simple Green to place it onto your rim. There were no directional cues on this tire, so it can go either way. Usually a front tire will go on quite a bit easier than the rear tire. Same process, put a little bit of air inside the tube as well as baby powder. Make sure the tube sits down nice and deep inside the rim to make putting the valve stem in the valve stem hole much easier. Apply Simple Green to lube the tire. Then start each tire iron a few inches on each side of the rim lock. Make sure the rim lock seats deep inside the rim, and then begin, just like the rear tire, the process of taking small bites, working each side of the tire opposing the rim lock. Double check to make sure that the tire is seated inside the rim. Then just small bites along the way, and the tire should go on seamlessly. You can see how air in the tube sets the tire in the proper place right here. Then set your final air pressure and tighten the rim lock. Install the front wheel. Apply grease near the wheel bearings where the spacers will go. Since I'm doing both wheels, I'm going to go ahead and pop some grease and spacers into the rear wheel as well. Cleaning the rotor off real quickly is always a good idea after you install a tire. Place grease on the front axle. Make sure the brake pads will allow the disc to fit inside them. Then with the axle prepared, push it through one fork leg, through the wheel, and then through the other side of the forks. Place the nut on there, and then just slightly tighten the nut. Then pump up the front brake, and then abruptly stop the front wheel by spinning it several times, which will align the forks and help prevent them from pinching. Then go ahead and tighten the pinch bolts on the fork legs. Check your owner's manual for the actual torque spec. Then tighten the axle nut. Install the front sprocket and rear sprocket. Pop the sprocket guard off. Then using a screwdriver and hammer, there are little locking tabs onto the washer, and you can just pound them flat against the sprocket. Either using a sprocket holder or just pop your bike in gear, and that should be able to help you get that nut off. The sprocket should just pop off. This one was a little stubborn, so I used a few tire irons, equal pressure on each side, and it popped right off. Clean up any additional chain lube or oil behind the sprocket. And thanks to our friends at Sunstar for supplying us with some awesome sprockets. Go ahead and replace the front sprocket on, install the washer and the nut. And as always, refer to your owner's manual for the proper torque spec. Make sure to hammer down on the locking tabs for the washer and then replace the sprocket guard. Since we're using the nuts and bolts from the old sprocket, I'm using some penetrating lube to make the removal process a little bit easier. Then with an Allen, a box wrench, and a hammer, I'll go ahead and remove the 6 sprocket bolts. Install the new rear sprocket onto the rim. We have a black anodized sprocket from Sunstar, which looks amazing. Place thread lock onto the threads and bolt heads of the rear sprocket bolts, and then install each bolt along with washer and nut behind it. Once all bolts are set, go ahead and use an Allen and a wrench, and then tighten in a crisscross pattern just to make sure equal pressure goes around the hub. And make sure to utilize your crescent wrench to hold the nut while you are doing your final tightening. Install new rear brake pads. You have this little bolt cover that you just have to pop off with a screwdriver to get access to your brake bolt. Remove that and both brake pads should fall right out. There are little heat pads and mounts behind the old rear brake pads that I put onto the new ones. Make sure that the brake caliper piston is all the way in. Then place the new rear pads inside the caliper. Replace your bolt, tighten, and then replace that little protective cover. Install new chain and rear wheel. Make sure that there's room for the disc to get in there. Grease up your rear axle. Then with your rear axle in your left hand, go ahead and place it through the swing arm. Then install the axle block, washer, and axle nut. Now it's time to install our new Sunstar chain. Since you always order a chain longer than you need, we're going to go ahead and put it through the rear wheel and front sprocket to make sure that we know what kind of length we need to make it. Length of a chain can be a personal preference. If you want to leave the axle blocks closer to the back, you'll have a little bit of a longer bike. If you want to shorten it up and allow for more chain stretch, you're going to put these axle blocks near the front, which is what I'm doing. Your final length also depends on cutting off complete lengths at a time. This is bad right here, so we're going to want to move it one back, and then now we're cutting off 2 complete lengths. Otherwise, you won't even be able to install the master link. Using a chain splitter, we'll go ahead and take off the 2 links that were shortening the chain. We'll spin the chain splitter all the way through as much as we can on one side, but it may not be enough to get the roller out, so I'll go ahead and pop it on the other side. Now the pin is completely free and we can take the 2 links off. Install the master link. And always put the final clip on with the open end facing the rear of the bike. To tighten the chain, make sure the axle blocks are aligned. Then a general rule of thumb is 3 fingers just above the chain guide. Now go ahead and adjust the chain adjusters as we're tightening up, making sure that they're staying even the entire time. When you're satisfied with the chain slack, go ahead and throw a paper towel in between your chain and your sprocket to butt up the adjusters against the axle nuts, tighten your axle and the chain adjusters. Thank you so much for watching episode number 11 of our bike build giveaway series. To win this bike, check the link in the description below. Thanks again to our friends at Rims Plus and Sunstar for supplying us with these awesome parts. More videos to your right. Subscribe if you'd like, and we'll see you next time.